Welcome to Satsang.
Could you please talk about paths to enlightenment?
There's no real path to enlightenment. There is no real journey because we are already beingness. We are already the Buddha. It is just that awareness is not aware of itself, or beingness is not aware of itself. So we are already that is sought. The different ways for that to occur, where awareness becomes aware of itself or beingness becomes aware of itself in an ongoing way, really revolve around the mind being prepared for enlightenment. And so there's different ways that that can be done. Basically, the only obstacle that is in the way of enlightenment or higher consciousness is the I. It is problematic because it's a survival mechanism. And as a survival mechanism, it attracts attention to itself constantly because of its need to control. And so the different ways that we can teach the mind to quieten down and become equanimous, and also allow ourselves to be present to what is real, involve two common paths: the Jnana path, which is the path of discipline, and the Bhakti path, which is a path of devotion and love. Both paths can bring you to superconsciousness. But in the marketplace, where we have families and we have jobs and we have responsibilities that people in monasteries and ashrams don't have, the Jnana path is not such a good path because we don't have the time and we have too many distractions away from the discipline that is required to fulfill the Jnana path. And so I advocate a combination of both paths: the path of devotion, the Bhakti path, and the Jnana path, the path of discipline. In discipline, I'm simply talking about meditation, self-inquiry. Really, we can do asanas, we can do chanting. There's a lot of different disciplines that we can do that bring the mind to a single point, that teach the mind to be quiet, and at the same time show all the obstacles that are in the way. Because if we really try to keep our mind from constantly reacting to life, we get to see what is creating the reaction. And because we can see it, we can then do something about it. And so in the Jnana path, we're developing a silent witness that watches the mind. And so we can see what the mind's nuts and bolts are up to. We can see our agendas. We can see our defense systems. We can see our belief systems. And we can see how all of these things together keep the mind contracting and resisting life. But in so seeing them, we can start to undo those things. And so in a lot of ways, preparing the mind for enlightenment or higher consciousness is a great undoing. Not really adding more, but taking away things that create contraction and resistance in our lives. On the other hand, the Bhakti path, the path of devotion, the path of love, is an interesting path because to really perceive love, we have to be open. So this path also demands that we see how the mind is keeping us closed and defended so we can undo those things. And so it is also a great undoing. Now, when you use these two paths together, they are like two wings of a bird, and you can fly high and you can stay high. And so the path of service, devotion, love, and the jnani path, the path of discipline, being a meditator, being a self-inquirer, undoing the mind, practicing openness, this all works. The thing is, a lot of people think that they can learn their way to higher consciousness by studying, by listening to gurus or studying books, or studying the sutras of the Buddha even. I don't feel that is correct at all. I don't think we can raise our consciousness levels at all by knowledge. It is only through practice that we raise our consciousness levels. And so if we practiced as a meditator, we become very present to reality. We develop a silent witness that allows us to watch the mind. If we practice the way of the heart, we actually have to practice openness, which means we have to take away all the obstacles, all the defense systems, all the belief systems that are in the way of us remaining open to serve heart. And so in this way, with this practice, our consciousness levels rise, but only in this way. And so most people stay in lower consciousness because that's survival. Survival is lower consciousness. And after all, the mind and the I is only a survival mechanism. It's designed for resistance. It's designed for contraction. It's designed for fight or flight. It's not designed for let go or acceptance or surrender, because they go against the survival mechanism. So they're the things that we actually have to practice. Otherwise, we stay lost in lower consciousness. And if we haven't found a way to be present to reality, if all we're present to really is a lot of dream in our heads, well, once again, we're locked and lost in lower consciousness. And so the practice of meditation, the practice of self-inquiry, the practice of openness, these practices take us to higher consciousness and eventually to home. So the Buddha that is already there gets to know itself in every moment. That's enlightenment. Are there any questions, any statements, or any challenges to this teaching here today?
The first question is, it looks like your teaching is a combination of the Bhakti and the jnani path, with some Buddhist and Advaita Vedanta methodologies as well. Are you taking the best of each tradition to make it your own teaching?
My own teaching, this teaching is thousands and thousands of years old. There's nothing I say that is original. There's nothing any sage can say that's original, in that it's all been said before, so many thousands of times. A sage, or someone who's awake, is simply a messenger, delivering the same message that every other sage that's ever lived has delivered. There's no originality. There can't be a claim to the teaching. That's not possible. It's been said so many thousands and thousands of times before. As far as me collecting things that work, yeah, I'm into what works. I'm very pragmatic. Whatever works is worthy. And so whatever works for you to raise your consciousness levels is worthy. I don't limit anything. Whatever works is best.
The next question is, sometimes you speak about the need to have one teacher only. Why is that?
Teachers are contradictory. They have different styles of teaching, and if you get involved with more than one teacher, you'll get confused. It's like having two guides who know two different ways to get out of the jungle, and you decide to go with both of them. Well, I'd hazard a guess you're going to get pretty lost. And the same goes for higher consciousness. One teacher, you follow that instruction, and they will help you find yourself as truth. Of course, they have to have found themselves as truth first and be living that. And so it's important for the seeker to make sure they pick a good guide Someone who actually is at home, knows how to get there, not someone who's pretending. Someone who's awake is awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as far as enlightenment's concerned. It's not something they have to sit. There is no practices left. It is finished. It is over. Find yourself someone like that and follow their instruction. That's best. That's what I did.
The next question is, how do I find the right teacher?
It's not a bad question. It's going to, the terrible side of that is, of course, it's related to your karma. Most of the world is locked in lower consciousness because that's their karma. If you find someone who's awake to be with, your karma is pretty good. If you can find someone to be with who you can actually hear, your karma is better again. And if your karma is good enough that you found someone to be with who's awake and you can hear them and you're willing to follow their instruction, well, your karma is brilliant. But I say it's all about karma. Sit with someone. See if they have a presence. If they don't have a presence, well, they may be teaching the Dharma, but they're not awake. Sit with them. Find out if they have a presence, and then find out if that presence is continuous. Because if it is, that person knows how to come home, because that person is at home. That person's worth listening to.
Can someone wake up without a teacher?
Heck yeah. Why not? How many lifetimes do you think you've been doing this? and maybe you didn't have a teacher in this lifetime, but what about last lifetime and the lifetime before and the lifetime before and the lifetime before? What were you doing then? You see, we drag our consciousness into every new life we have, whether it's detrimental to us or whether it's beneficial to us. We drag our consciousness with us in seed form. And so, yeah, people wake up in this life and they haven't had a teacher, but they're real rarities. Most people who wake up have done the work, a lot of work in this lifetime. But those people who have woken up, they've done it before. They're just playing an old game.
Does satsang need to be every day, and why?
Well, there must be an assumption in the question if you put why on the end of the question. The assumption that satsang needs to be every day. For someone who's interested in truth, well, let's put it another way. Someone who's awake, satsang is every moment, 24 hours a day. Awareness being aware of itself, and as a result of that, a Buddha field or a presence. So someone who's awake basically lives as a presence. Someone who's not awake, even though they are a Buddha, are living as an I, which is just a survival mechanism program of the mind. There's quite a difference. If you if you really want to wake up, find someone who's awake to hang out with, and they'll help you take you apart so your mind can be prepared for enlightenment, for the ultimate accident. Trying to do anything like that by yourself is difficult because you're fighting against a survival mechanism that really is not programmed for anything else but survival. I remember listening to Osho Rajneesh, who was my spiritual master for 8 years, talking about himself and saying, "I'm not your dear old uncle. I haven't come here to flatter you. I'm your murderer. I've come here to help you murder your ego." And in a lot of ways, that's true, because the only obstacle that is in the way of higher consciousness and truth is the ego. the dream that thinks it's you. Stop imagining and the dream disappears. You see, the I can't exist without imagination because it's not real. When awareness becomes aware of itself, the mind knows what's real. Beingness. And you are beingness. You have always been beingness. You cannot be anything other than beingness. But as long as you're ego-based, that's where awareness is just on the mind and the ego, you will feel that you are the ego and the body. And that's simply not true. You are beingness.
What path to enlightenment did you follow?
I think you said, what path to enlightenment did I follow? I think that was the question. Was it?
Yes.
Okay. Every path. Every path. I got into Buddhism. I got into Hinduism. I got into Sufism. I got into the Muslim religion. I got into the Catholic and Christian religion. I got into the Jewish religion, the Kabbalah. I studied it all because I was interested. And so when you say what path, well, you could say I practiced acceptance. I practiced openness. I practiced meditation. I practiced self-inquiry. I practiced Sufi whirling. I practiced asanas, yoga. I practiced Qigong, Tai Chi. I practiced lots of things that interested me. Kung Fu. I loved the present moment. I still love the present moment. This eternal moment without a thought is so beautiful. And so what path did I take? All paths. All paths that gave the slightest percentage to higher consciousness, including the path of love, including the diet I ate, the color of the clothes I wore, the type of music I listened to. Whatever gave that little bit more percentage to higher consciousness was followed. Now you could ask, well, why would you do that? Because I love truth.
We have a comment from a viewer who says, you spoke earlier of the importance of only having only one teacher, and yet you seem to have had many different teachers and have still found your true self.
Yeah. So I was with Osho for 8 years, from 1982 to 1990 when he died. And when he died, I was kind of lost in a lot of ways, because Osho had led us to believe to some degree that he was the only one that was awake. and he was such a big event, a big image. And my understanding of enlightenment was a little bit skew-whiff, because he represented a truth to me. And so I was with him for the 8 years though, and I was totally with him. I wasn't with anybody else. And I practiced what he had taught me: meditation, self-inquiry, the practice of openness, the way of the heart, for a lot of years, until about 1998, I think, another 8 years. But I practiced all of those things. And then the Advaita Vedanta teachers came to Perth, and I went and saw them because I was interested. And the moment one of them walked in, Isaac Shapiro actually walked into an auditorium, I woke up again, because I had awakenings in the 80s, and I woke up again. And I found myself as love and truth, everything, nothing. Mind stopped. And then from 1988 through to 98 through to 99, there was 1,000 satori's, 1,000 awakenings. And there was Isaac and Nakunu and Gangaji and Vartman and Papaji, who I didn't see Papaji, but I took him on as a teacher, and Ramana Maharshi, who I took on as a teacher. And I studied them all. And I practiced self-inquiry diligently. Every thought that arose was challenged with the question, who's aware? And it would turn awareness back to itself. And eventually, in the end of May 1999, after spending a couple of weeks in retreat with Vartman, awakening stayed. The Satori never stopped. It's here to this day, 20 years later, 21 years later. And so, yes, there were teachers of different qualities, but that was because I couldn't be with them because they were all travelers. I could be with Osho because he stayed in one place, and I stayed with him. But with the traveling teachers, it was very difficult. I had a young family and I couldn't travel. And so as the different teachers came along, when I was with them, I was totally with them. But I was also pretty pure in Advaita Vedanta. Self-inquiry to me was something that you didn't stop doing. You just did continuously to every thought that arose. And awareness just kept turning back to itself over and over again. And one day, in the end of May, 29th, I think, of May 1999, it just never turned back away from itself. It was like two magnets came together. Awareness locked onto itself and has been onto itself now for 21 years. The sense of I disappeared. The sense of somebody being here disappeared. The sense of profound contentment for no reason has been here since. But if you want to get yourself really confused, just try being with half a dozen teachers at once, or even two, because they talk differently. They have different angles, and they're way trickier than you believe.
The next question is, I feel quite disheartened with the practice of self-inquiry, as I'm just getting frustrated. Does Advaita Vedanta actually work?
Well, I'm living proof that it does. But it wasn't just Advaita Vedanta that I used. I got into higher consciousness and the raising of consciousness levels when I was 19. And so I've been playing this game for a long time. Initially, I got into it because I wanted to be bigger, better, and more powerful in the material world. But a lot of the things that I was doing and a lot of the different methodologies I was undertaking were actually allowing me to become higher and higher in consciousness. And Advaita Vedanta really is for people at the end of the path, not for people at the beginning. I didn't realize that when I started doing Advaita Vedanta. I thought that it was wonderful. I thought everyone could wake up. And then in studying Ramana Maharshi, I recognized a question he was asked about self-inquiry and Advaita Vedanta, and who it was for and who it wasn't for. And he was saying that it was for people who had already done all the work on themselves, done all the meditations, done all the asanas, done the stripping down. And I believe that to be true. If you haven't worked on your mind, if your mind is not prepared to support enlightenment, it's not going to. And so Advaita Vedanta can be very frustrating for people who haven't done the work on themselves. Because even if they find beingness as themselves, they come back to ego-based reality pretty promptly, because the mind contracts and awareness comes away from itself and comes back onto the mind. And so you get to live for a little bit as beingness, as presence, and then you come back to living as an I, which is a little bit like heaven and hell. The mind needs to be prepared for enlightenment. It doesn't happen by mistake. The mind has to be prepared because it's a survival mechanism. And for it to become equanimous, it needs to learn unconditional surrender.
Emma would like to ask a question.
Hello.
Good morning.
It might be morning here. I wonder where it is, what it is in America right now.
Hmm. Can you please describe this moment?
There's absolutely nothing here. Yet if I continue to look at it, there is everything. The whole universe is here. And there is absolutely no separation whatsoever. Everything is one. Is there anything else, Emma?
Yeah.
We are that.
Next, Satya would like to ask a question.
Hi, Satya.
Hello, Vishrant. Vishrant, when nothingness is beautiful, is peaceful and silent, then why is the mind afraid to jump into nothingness?
Because it's got a program inside of it to protect itself called fear. And that program is automatic and unconscious in most human beings. And any time nothingness or the unknown presents itself to us, fear arises to protect us. It's our main defense system for survival of the species.
Okay. So how we can train our mind to jump into emptiness?
You have to be willing to be out of control. And if we look at that closely, that means we have to be willing to die, and we have to be willing to be insane, because they're the two main things that we fear losing control over. And so in the loss of control, we have the survival mechanism of fear come up to protect us, but it's actually in the way. If you can prepare the mind by becoming willing to die, by willing to be annihilated, by willing to be insane, you've prepared the mind for enlightenment.
Okay. Thank you, Vishrant.
The next question is from Rebecca, who asks, I love the collective energy of the Sangha. During satsang, I sense your students experiencing states of bliss. It's beautiful. Can you please explain why these states are experienced and how to experience it when not in the presence of a teacher?
That's good question. When I was with Osho, sometimes there was 2,000 people in the auditorium in satsang, and sometimes there was 20,000. It was big. And different people would go into different states of bliss and different states of ecstasy because of the presence of the Guru, the presence of Osho. And this happens around people who are awake. If you tune in, your mind drops and you can experience euphoric states, ecstasy, bliss. It's very beautiful. One of the descriptions of enlightenment is Sat Chit Ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. And someone who's awake is experiencing truth. They are conscious of truth and they are blissed out. And so that bliss is shared in a way. You want to find the same thing by yourself, wake up. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to rely on someone who's awake. But someone who's awake, if you're with them, they are living as presence. That presence can be felt as bliss sometimes. You tune into it and you can find yourself as presence. It's a doorway to your own true nature. And so those who are awake on the planet are really lights in the darkness that if you tune into, you can find that you are also a light in the darkness. It's up to you. It's difficult to find by yourself. It is much easier to find in the presence of someone who's awake. But really, once you've tasted that, you want more of that, because that is our true nature. That is home.
The next question is, if what we're searching for on the path to enlightenment is formless, does it matter which path we take to get there?
No, you can do whatever you like, whatever works. Now, I don't have anything against anyone doing anything that works. Whatever works for you is best. It's highly unlikely the Jnana path will work for people who are in the marketplace, even though Westerners prefer the Jnana path because they're too distracted. They're too distracted by work, too distracted by family. Jnana path is really good for people in monasteries and ashrams or caves. The Bhakti path, on the other hand, which is the path of devotion and love, is not that popular with Westerners, but it is probably the better path, because ultimately it is only the love affair the mind has with truth that allows it to surrender unconditionally to truth and give its life to God. It is in that love affair that awakening occurs.
What is the best thing a seeker can do towards enlightenment?
The best thing a seeker can do towards enlightenment is to find someone who's enlightened and go and hang out with them. That's the free way. Every other way is like a meandering stream that may or may not make it to the ocean. You hang out with someone who's awake and you're in the fast lane, and it's going to be unpleasant at times, because everything that's in you that's in the way is going to be observed, and anything that's in you that's like a pain body or trauma is going to come to the surface. It's all going to happen. It's all going to get cleaned out. The free way is hanging out with someone who's awake.
The next question is, I find I have more of a connection to the teacher than the teaching. Some say that devotion is one of the fastest paths to enlightenment. Is this true?
Yes, it is true. In devotion, we surrender ourselves completely, and it is only in unconditional surrender that people wake up. They don't wake up otherwise. You surrender your life to truth. You give your life to truth. But you can also give your life to heart. That can wake you up too. And when we look at our lives and how our quality of our lives are, if we're in devotion to heart, which basically takes us into service of humanity or the planet or something besides ourselves, there's a lot of joy in that. There's a lot of joy in the way of the heart. There's a lot of joy in the Bhakti Path. And it's a beautiful way to live. I see Buddhism as the way of the heart. I don't see it as any other way. It is the way of the heart, the way of loving kindness, of being gentle, of being kind, of taking care. This is what I call the beauty way. And if we are in the marketplace, I think this is the best way to live.
Is there a difference between devotion and surrender?
Yeah. Surrender is a non-doing. Devotion is actually a doing. We can accept life as it is. That's also a doing. But acceptance teaches us surrender, which is actually a non-doing. Devotion is a doing. We're devoted to something, and more than likely we're doing something in that devotion. We may be loving the Buddha. We may be loving a teacher. We may be loving beingness. Depends on what we can love. Ultimately, you love beingness or God or truth or whatever you want to call it. But the mind gives itself to that. And then that uses the mind. So you're no longer the master. You as an I are no longer the master. You've laid yourself down.
What does devotion look like when around a guru or sangha?
It doesn't necessarily have a look. It's actually a feeling inside. I was very devoted to my spiritual master, Osho Rajneesh, but it mightn't have been that obvious to people I was, because as a Westerner, I wasn't gushy about it. But if you had have come into my offices in the 80s, I was a publisher, and I had 14 offices in Fremantle, and each office had a 4-foot high picture of Osho in it. I was the most unlikely sannyasin, really. I was too businesslike, too deadly in the business world. It took me a lot to take it all down and find my heart. But I was devoted. But it doesn't really necessarily have a look. Sometimes you see people bowing down and touching people's feet. Well, that really wasn't my go. Sometimes you see people wearing pictures of their guru on their chest, on the end of a mala. Yeah, I did that. I did that for, I think, 3 years. Yeah. Before Osho said it wasn't required anymore because too many of his sannyasins were being attacked around the world because of religious prejudice. I have so much gratitude towards that man. I love him to bits.
The next question is, can you burn away the sense of identity through devotion?
Yes, you can, because what happens when you move into the Bhakti Path, basically the path of devotion is also the path of service. And the more in service you are to others, and the less in service you are to yourself, the less of you there is. So it's not about burning it away. I don't even like that term. It's just that there's an absence of you because you're more interested in helping others than you are in helping yourself. And so there's an absence of you. But of course, that doesn't wake you up. That just makes you happier. In Buddhism, they have this wonderful saying, no I, no problem.
The next question is, the path to enlightenment seems very long. Is there an express lane or faster way?
Heck yeah. Hang out with someone who's awake. See, that question is very similar to an earlier question. There is an express lane, yeah. Find yourself someone who's awake and pay attention. Listen. Follow instructions. It's a little bit like you want to learn how to be an electrician. You find an electrician to be an apprentice of, and you listen to the electrician, and you pay attention, and you do what you're told. And eventually you'll become an electrician as well, because you have trained, you have studied, you have listened, you've been a student. People who think they can do this by themselves, generally speaking, the arrogance will get in the way. In this life, I've done many things, but I've had many teachers. Thinking that you are further ahead than you are is dangerous as you always remain the beginner, always the beginner. And then existence has this way of showing you, of flowing through you. Always the beginner. But if you want to find yourself quickly, find someone who's awake, who's willing to work with you. Find someone who's awake, who can see you, who is willing to undo you. Your willingness is what's going to make the difference.
The next question is, do we need to worship the guru?
Jeez, I hope not. You got to remember that we are all one. There's no higher and there's no lower. We are all one. There is only one being here. This idea that there is holier and less holy is ridiculous. We are all Buddhas. Just some people are aware of it and some people are not. There is no better. There is no lesser. We are one. Worshipping a guru, I wouldn't advise that. Tune in to the Buddha. Tune in and find yourself as truth.
Do I have to agree and follow everything my teacher says?
Depends on what you want. Depends on how far you want to go. For myself, I followed my teacher's instructions to the letter because they knew the way and I didn't. If I knew the way, I would have already been home, but I wasn't. But that goes back, way back to when I was 19. I had teachers then who weren't awake, but I followed what they said because they were further ahead than me. And as a result of following what they said, I became very successful in the world of business. Not because it was my idea. I had followed what they had said, and they were good at what they did. And the same goes for dealing with people who are awake. You want to wake up, you follow the instruction. If you know better, you'd already be awake.
Is there a danger in trusting a guru to?
Heck yeah. You got to check your teacher out very thoroughly, your awake person out very thoroughly. Make sure they are walking their talk. Otherwise, you can get trapped. There's a lot of people out there selling spirituality just to make $1, and they're corrupt. They get caught in all sorts of things that aren't savory. Someone who's awake has surrendered everything. They're not attached to money. They're not attached to power. They're not attached to their life. They're not attached to their sexuality. They're free. Awakening or enlightenment is freedom. Check out and see if the person who's awake or saying they're awake is free, or if they're still somehow imprisoned through their attachments.
Does the Bhakti Path bring purity of mind?
Purity of mind is an interesting concept. What does it actually mean? In Hindu, it would mean to be sattvic, pristine, clear, and certain practices enable that. Self-inquiry, asanas, witnessing the mind, undoing the mind, meditation. Certain practices allow the mind to become quite clear, quite pristine, quite sattvic, and certain practices don't. The spiritual aspirant starts practicing those things that facilitate clarity because they love clarity. What do you facilitate?
Can prayer help towards the Bhakti Path of enlightenment?
I don't know, because I haven't found anything to pray to. I found beingness as self, but there's nothing there, as there's no entity there. There's just everything as one. And so this idea of praying to something to me is quite foreign, because I don't know anything to pray to. And I don't, if there's nothing there to pray to, because prayers usually are about begging for something, I just don't see it. Everything is God. Everything is truth. Everything is beingness. But there's nobody there that is going to grant wishes that I've ever seen or experienced. If you must pray, one prayer. Thank you.
The next question is, how can I use single-mindedness, trust, and devotion when in self-inquiry?
Can you ask that question again? It sounded a bit complex.
Sure. How can I use single-mindedness, trust, and devotion when in self-inquiry?
Right, just do self-inquiry. That'll do. And then when you're not doing self-inquiry, try the rest. Self-inquiry is brilliant, though. Every thought that you have can be inquired into its origin. Every thought can be asked, who's aware? What's aware? Every thought.
How can a seeker use Jnani knowledge to know the experience of the one true reality?
All knowledge is a waste of time. The only thing that the mind needs to learn is surrender. That's it. If your mind has learned unconditional surrender, you've learned everything you need to learn towards higher consciousness. Really. Surrender is the key. It is the doorway. The Buddha didn't sit under the Bodhi tree and think about all the knowledge he had. He sat under the Bodhi tree and he surrendered unconditionally, and awakening occurred. All the mind needs to learn is surrender. Nothing else.
How to be completely sincere and total on the path to enlightenment?
The question's an odd question. Try not being sincere and total and see where it takes you. Try being half-baked and see what happens. Totality really does rule in a lot of ways in any endeavour as a human being, whether it's music or poetry or football or business, any form of achievement, higher consciousness is achieved as a result of totality. That's up to you. You don't have to be total. It's up to you. You probably won't make it at anything you do if you're not, but that's up to you. As far as sincerity is concerned, if you're not sincere, you've already ruled yourself out of the game.
The next question is, how do I put truth first?
Give yourself absolutely no choice. But of course, it's a difficult one if you don't know what truth is. If you've had satoris and you've experienced yourself as beingness, you know what truth is. If you haven't had satoris, then you're going to have to take it on a certain maybe there's such a thing. And because there's so many people or gurus out there talking about it, you just put that as a maybe and you practice. You practice self-inquiry, you practice meditation, you practice preparing the mind, and maybe a satori will come. You go and hang out with the awakened ones, and maybe a satori will come. When you have a satori, you know, at least for a little while, that you are truth. And then the real thirst begins. The thirst for freedom, the thirst to know yourself as truth continuously begins. Because the difference is huge. The difference between being-based reality, which is enlightenment, and ego-based reality is huge. One of them is profoundly content for no reason, and the other one is miserable because it's constantly desiring things it hasn't got and wants to change them, constantly getting attached to things and fearful of losing them. And so one is suffering and the other is profound contentment. Go for truth. Go for higher consciousness. It's the best game in town. It's the only game that's really worth playing. Wake up.
The next question is, how to dissolve in devotion?
It's such an academic question when it's really what dissolves is the thing that's asking the question. You know? Such a funny question. The only way you're going to discover that is to practice, is to try it. There's no other way. There's no academic answer that's going to help you. None whatsoever. Become devoted if you want. See where it takes you. In devotion to Osho, I found love. In devotion to my Advaita Vedanta teachers, I found love. And in that love, I dissolved as an I. But that was because I allowed myself to be open enough, to be undefended enough to perceive love. Now that's the work, is allowing yourself to be that open, that undefended.
The next question is, how can I use devotion on the path to enlightenment?
Wow, devotion isn't something you use, it's something that happens as a result of you giving yourself to something else, you loving something else. So I think it was back in the late 80s, early 90s, I decided to dedicate my life to heart, because I recognized clearly that I'd been living as a desert, as a businessman, living as a head, basically, all mind. And I was out of touch with my heart. And so I dedicated my life to heart. And that meant for me that I had to find heart, because there wasn't much there. I was too businesslike. I was too military inside myself, too hard, too defended, too warlike. And so I had to take down the armor and take down the weapons and learn to walk through the world without defenses, vulnerable, so I could find my heart. And I gave my life to heart. And so in that, I went into service. I didn't have a great deal of skills, so I went back to school and trained as a naturopath so I could be in service to humans. And then I trained as a psychotherapist so I could be in service to humans. Because the way of the heart, when the heart affects the mind, you just want to take care of things. You want to take care of everything, actually. This is how the heart or love affects the mind. And so I went into service, and I did 10 years of service with other human beings, and with plants, and with animals, with everything I met. It was a love affair with life, a love affair with the planet, a love affair with people, facilitated by openness, facilitated by a lack of defenses. Instead of being closed, I developed a way of life of being open, open to everything and everyone. And this facilitated the awakening of the heart. And this is what I call the beauty way. This is what I call the Buddhist way, actually. A way of living in the world that is wide open, the way of the heart. So I don't see Buddhism as a true religion, because I don't see Buddhism worshipping a god. But I see it as a way of life that is very beautiful. A way towards higher consciousness that is very beautiful. A way of being in the world that is very beautiful. So I advocate it. But it does mean that you have to strip down your defense systems and have to be vulnerable to the world, because otherwise you don't perceive love. All you perceive is the mind. Love tends to be perceived in openness, not closure. And so that's going to be up to you, because you create your reality by the way you think and by the way you act in the world.
The last question we have is, how can I use discipline on the path to enlightenment?
Aha. Well, an understanding of discipline is not a bad idea. What does discipline actually mean? Every human being who's an adult is disciplined. They went to school and they learned how to sit in class and pass exams. So everybody has discipline in them. But most people give themselves too many choices. And so discipline kind of like gets washed away. True discipline is when we give ourselves no choice. And so I'll give you an example of that. We decide that we're going to meditate every day. Now, maybe our schedule doesn't allow us to meditate at the same time every day, but we can meditate every day. And so discipline dictates that we give ourselves no choice, but we find a way to meditate every day. And so for me, because I had a young family and because I had a business to run, psychotherapy and naturopathy, I couldn't do a great deal of meditation, formal meditation that is, during the day because I was distracted by my family and by work. And so when my family went to bed at night time, that's when I used to meditate, and I'd meditate for 2 hours every night after everyone else was asleep. So the discipline was there. The practice was there. I gave myself no choice. Even if I went out to dinner and partied on, I would still meditate every night for 2 hours. That's a discipline. That's a giving myself absolutely no choice. When it came to self-inquiry that I learnt through the Advaita Vedanta methodology, every thought that arose in my mind was challenged with the question, who's aware? I gave myself no choice. That was the discipline. No choice at all. If we give ourselves choices, our mind will take the easy way, always, always. If we remove choice, then we do what we have promised ourselves we're going to do. And the same goes for, say we want to change our diet, say we want to become a vegan, which is really difficult if you've been a meat eater or a vegetarian, because all of a sudden you're giving away a great deal of what you've become very accustomed to. And if you give yourself no choice, becoming a vegan is easy. If you give yourself a choice, you have a serious problem, because your mind, because of the way it is tricky as, it will take the easy way. It'll do what it wants. But if you give yourself no choice, you'll become a vegan, if that's what you want. It's because you've taken away the choice that is possible. And the same goes for giving up smoking or giving up alcohol or drugs. If you give yourself no choice, it's easy. The moment you allow yourself choice, you are lost, because your mind will take the easy way, the comfortable way. It is programmed to do so. So discipline on the path to enlightenment is very important. It's important that if we're going for higher consciousness, we give ourselves no choice. If we're going to heal the wounds of our heart, we have to become willing to feel those wounds, to heal them. We give ourselves no choice. Because if we give ourselves a choice, we're definitely not going to feel them. We're definitely not going to heal the wounds of our heart. And so discipline is quite a requirement for higher consciousness. And that's up to you, because you're responsible for your thoughts and you're responsible for your actions. Nobody else can help you in that area, only you. And so besides the devotional side, the Jnana path, which is discipline, the discipline's essential. Otherwise, we'll just stay locked in lower consciousness, taking the comfortable path. That's how it is. It's up to you. You're going to create your reality by the way you think, by the way you act in the world. So if you want to give up cigarettes, you give yourself no choice. You give them up. You don't have another cigarette. No choice. The moment you give yourself a choice, you'll be back to smoking. That's how it is. Remove choice and you have discipline. Include choice and you have anarchy.
We have one more question from a viewer.
Uh-huh.
Is being with you in satsang meditating?
If you sit with me in satsang, your mind will start to quieten down to a level where it'll stop. You are then aware of what is real, because you are not aware of your mind because it is not moving. The only thing that is not real is your mind and its constant story. True meditation is being aware of what is real, not what is not real. So if you come and sit in satsang and your mind stops, you'll be aware of what is real. And what is ultimately real is who you truly are, beingness. In the presence of someone who's awake, that is a possibility. So yes, being aware of anything that is real is meditation. The problem is the thinking. Are we aware of that at the same time? Because then we're kind of like in a dream at the same time. Come into meditation, come into satsang. Yeah, that works. Thank you for satsang. Hearts here today.